should get there. Okay, Jonah, so I'll let you take it when you're ready to kick it off.
You want me to introduce it?
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay,
Marco.
I'll get going. All right, folks, welcome to this talk about OpenSearch. Just a brief introduction about myself. I'm Marco Massenzio, Senior Principal at Adobe Experience Cloud, where we build a large-scale cloud enterprise SaaS deployed on Kubernetes. I still do a lot of coding, as you can hear, and Java, C++ are my things, and most recently Go. This is the Cloud Native at Scale group at San Francisco-based meetup focused on open source and projects and technology. For the guys that have joined today, welcome. And today we'll be talking about OpenSearch. As you know, recently Elastic, the company behind Elasticsearch, have changed the terms of the licenses. And so a group of OSS advocates are led by AWS for the original project to continue development under an OSS license, open source, so it still remains open source for people to use freely. Today we'll learn all about this new project by two wonderful speakers, Eli and Jonah. Eli is the lead product manager at AWS, working on OpenSearch. He has spent his career working on different databases, analytics tools, and IoT systems, including SQL Server, Elasticsearch, and now OpenSearch. Our first speaker, Jonah Kowall, is an expert in the observability space, contributing to projects such as OpenSearch, Jaeger, and OpenTelemetry. I have questions about OpenTelemetry, Jonah. I'm going to chase you. He's currently the CTO at Massenzio, leading their open source SaaS observability platform. Jonah, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thanks for the intro, Marco. And although I love to talk about OTel, not the topic we're talking about today, but yeah, maybe next time. So I'll start by sharing my screen. Hopefully it looks good. And thanks for joining me today and joining us in the meetup. I do want to keep it interactive. So feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box or in the chat, and I'll kind of monitor those things as we go and try to address them. And just to give you a little heads up on the way that we're going to structure it, there's kind of two parts to this. The first one is I'm going to talk a little bit about the background of ELK, the licensing change, and kind of the things that are unfortunately happening in the industry. Obviously, I work for a vendor, so we try to monetize open source, which I think is fine, but it's one thing to monetize it. It's another thing to take it away from the community. So we'll talk about that. And then Eli will take over, and he's going to dig deep into the project because he spends all of his time working on the open source project and making sure that that's going the right direction. So it'll be great to hear in depth where the project is going. So for those that are not familiar with the ELK, these essentially stand for three previously open source projects. Elasticsearch is a distributed database based on Lucene, which is an Apache project that's still part of the Apache Software Foundation. And it basically creates a scalable clustering method to run this for larger larger requirements, whether you have availability needs or throughput needs. Lucene is a single library you can embed in an application, and Elasticsearch creates a scalable cluster to do that type of thing. Kibana is the front end, so that's the K in ELK, and it's used to query Elasticsearch. So this is log analytics, dashboarding, analysis. Another fun fact is Grafana, which many of us use for Prometheus or metric data, was a fork of Kibana. So it's interesting to see how they diverged if you use both. It'd be awesome if they came back together. Eli's going to talk about that because it would be awesome to do logs and metrics together again. Elastic, the corporation, was founded in 2012, IPO'd in 2018. and they basically steered these projects, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means. So previous to this year in January, Elastic licensed their products in Apache 2. You could do what you want with it. And they had a special Elastic license that provided more guardrails, but more capabilities for users that just wanted a free system to do certain things. So all the add-ons many people use, which are part of XPack, things like security and APM and other things that Elastic built, had a special restrictive license outside of the open source. And so this was kind of how it was before. This enabled us as a company and many other hundreds of companies that I've spoken to use this software in any way that they wanted. You could build something new, you could embed it, you could do whatever you want. That's the beauty of Apache 2, is it's completely open for everything. So in 2021, they made a change and they took away the Apache 2.0 license and they introduced a SSPL license, and this is not open source anymore. So it creates a lot of restrictions and challenges. And a lot of companies, our customers and just other companies I talk to, see some risk in this just because there is, you know, they either license it or they, you know, potentially have issues that they have to mitigate or think about. And so with this change, there was a lot of people that were rather upset. There's thousands of people that have contributed to this code base over the years. Most people do it for free, giving back to the community. I work on several open source projects, as Marco mentioned, and I don't expect someone to take my work and remove it from the community and turn it into a commercial only product. Sure, people can take that work and derive a new product from it and sell it and do what they want, that's fine. But the community should always have those contributions. That's part of what it is to work in open source, is that it's always there for everyone to take advantage of in whatever way they want. So people were really upset about it, and a lot of people in a poll that the guys at Fireship posted said they were going to actually switch to open source. So I hope people are considering that, just because the community is really important. And the other challenges since that change, Elastic has kept closing down the ecosystem. They've made deliberate changes to projects to break open source compatibility with their own open source and with OpenSearch, which I'll talk about in a couple of minutes. Here are some examples of what they've changed. All of the, basically the client libraries, the beats, several other things they've changed. They've started breaking other things. So like one of the projects I work on, Jaeger, we use Elasticsearch libraries to connect to Elasticsearch from Jaeger. Jaeger is a CNCF project. We actually had to make changes in our client library because we didn't want any non-Apache 2 code inside of a CNCF project. They're very adamant about that in the CNCF, as they are about an Apache software foundation. So this stuff causes a lot of trickle-down problems for various companies. I know that there was actually a question here on EFK. We actually suggest to all users, instead of using beats, to use FluentD and FluentBit. So that's the EFK stack versus the ELK stack. FluentD and FluentBit are much more modern. Obviously, no one's going to take these away from the community because it's part of CNCF. So definitely be aware of what you're embedding in your applications and how that licensing can affect what you're building personally or for your companies. So it can cause a lot of challenges for sure. And there's some workarounds Eli will talk about too. We've done a lot of forking of various things in the community to try to fix it. So when these projects get combined together, and these are some of the examples. Jaeger and Skywalking both had to make changes because they wanted to remain Apache 2. If they use non-Apache 2 licensed software, then it contaminates the license, which causes other problems. So the CNCF over here on the right has been very strict and adamant about being careful of this. Similarly, those of you that are in observability, Grafana has also been making license changes, which is causing a lot of concern for Prometheus users. So if you use Prometheus today, Apache 2, CNCF, likely you're analyzing with Grafana because that is the standard way people analyze the data. But be careful because licensing changes could be coming further. I hope that's not the case, but it's definitely a concern in the community. So one of the things that we've done, and this is a blog that Eli posted along with other team members, is forking the client libraries to ensure that there are open source options. And so it's a constant push and pull where Eli's got all this work to do and a roadmap to build, and yet there are these curveballs being thrown into the community because Elastic really wants to create separation between the projects and hopefully not lose users to the open source. That's their main goal, is to try to keep their community active, which I think is going to be a big challenge with the licensing put forward. So definitely check with your attorneys if you're concerned in your companies. There's lots of good resources to use out there to understand open source licensing. It's a pretty complex topic. So the thing to consider, and I ask this of customers pretty regularly, is if you were starting a company today and picking a database, would you buy Oracle again? You probably managed Oracle. I know I have. There's nothing wrong with it. It's perfectly great technology, but over time you become beholden to them as the licensor of your software. So you need to pay them for maintenance. You need to ensure that all your contracts are up to date. It gets expensive and time consuming. Whereas open source, which most of us have moved to since the days of Oracle databases, is a much easier way to work. We have lots of options for support, for providers, cloud providers, other options out there to exist. So it really just depends on whether you see yourself as an open source centric company. I know my company is, and most of you probably are as well. Or you want to go down a proprietary path where you may have to make some difficult situations down the line. Especially if you're using free software, because they can always decide that there's no longer a free option and all of a sudden you're left with the bill or how to deal with the budgetary issues there. So definitely think about it. This is why software foundations are critical, because they ensure that these technologies will always be open to everyone and no one can take it away from the community. That's the important part about these foundations like CNCF and Apache. So I'm going to stop sharing, pass it over to Eli, and he's going to dive into the project, the roadmap, and lots of other goodies. Definitely answer questions. I know there's already one in there for you, Eli. So
yeah,
pass it over to you.
Yeah, so there were two questions. The first one was, is the recommendation to use CNCF products instead of Apache 2 products? I mean, me or you, Jonah, could take that one.
So every CNCF project is Apache 2. That's required. The licensing is always Apache 2. It will never change. So you're always ensured that no one can take that away from you because the software is licensed in an open way that you can do anything you want with it. That's the beauty of Apache, is there's no restrictions. So that's definitely not a concern. You can take the other one, Eli.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll just add to that last statement, like the Apache 2 license is one of the most widely adopted open source licenses. It's, obviously the Apache 2 foundation projects are licensed that way, but also like many of the Linux Foundation projects, including CNCF, are under the Apache 2 license. Okay, other question. Okay, so you're on Elastic Enterprise 7.15 and you want to move to OpenSearch. So there are some mechanisms to do that. Snapshots is definitely probably your best approach. There are some differences in the enterprise product that Elastic offers and the open source product. So OpenSearch is based off of the open source distribution of Elasticsearch 7.10.2, and it includes additional plugins and features that were from its predecessor project, Open Distro for Elasticsearch, wearing the shirt. And so, you know, some of those features are similar to the ones in Elastic Enterprise, but the implementations may vary. For example, if you're using some of the security features, you're probably going to have to do some work to get things to be, you know, compatible.
So there's another question from Bankat. I think this is for you, Jonah. It's what about investments that were already made in the environments like Oracle are made where the roadmap and migration to open source is always that need to be toward.
Yeah, I mean, migrating is always difficult, but
yeah,
now you're at the point with Elasticsearch where you can actually migrate to open source without an issue. So if you're on these versions of 7.x in general, it's easy to move to OpenSearch today. Now, when 8.0 comes out, there will be lots of breaking changes, some of them intentional, some of them may be required. Migrating after version 8 comes out will probably be much harder. And Eli, I don't know if you want to add more to that, but.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add that like the entire open source contributing community has spent a ton of work trying to make it wire compatible with Elasticsearch 7.10.2 to minimize the friction when moving over. There's even a compatibility mode that has the project report out responses to the API verbatim, the way it would on OSS Elasticsearch 7.10.2. So there's been a lot of work to really try to minimize that friction.
Okay, like if you want to start your
yeah, let me
share.
Grab my screen here. Let's see, can you guys see the introducing OpenSearch slide?
Yep,
we do. Yes.
All right. Thanks, Jonah. Thanks, everyone. So I'm going to walk through what the OpenSearch project's all about. We'll talk about what the project is, some popular use cases, you know, why might you choose it. We'll recap some of the things that have happened since the launch earlier this year. I'm going to demo how to get started. It's really easy. If you have Docker installed, it's even easier. So we'll walk through that. We'll talk about where the project's headed. And then if you want to get involved in the project, we'll talk about some ways that you can contribute. So what is the OpenSearch project? The OpenSearch project is a search engine and analytics suite. It's open source and community driven, and it's derived from Apache 2, Elasticsearch, and Kibana 7.10.2. It's comprised of 3 components. There's OpenSearch, which is the search engine that's written in Java. It's, you know, Jenna mentioned this earlier, it's based on Lucene. There's the OpenSearch Dashboards UI tool, which provides the analytics UI, and that's derived from Kibana. And then there's a bunch of plugins and tools that add functionality like alerting, security, machine learning, and we'll dive into some of those features in the upcoming slides. So what are some of the use cases for OpenSearch? As you can imagine, text search is the first one that comes to mind. It is a search engine after all. The reason that it's widely adopted for search use cases is really what it's built on top of. Lucene, the search library itself, does a lot of things that help for search use cases. For one, it indexes data into an inverted index format, which is an optimized format for quickly retrieving results for text-based searches. And then there's a bunch of relevancy and ranking features, so you can score your search results in custom ways based off of your own search needs. The next use case that you know, I see a lot of is using it as a document store for streaming data. So a concrete example of that would be like IoT analytics, where you've got maybe hundreds or thousands of sensors that are all emitting data, and you need to centralize that data into a place where you can analyze it. OpenSearch is well built for this scenario because it supports high volume ingest in near real time. And then it's a distributed system, so it can horizontally scale to meet large storage needs. And then this kind of leads to the next use case, which is using it for analytics. So OpenSearch has a built-in analytics UI tool, OpenSearch dashboards. It also has a rich set of aggregation features built into the search engine itself, so you can perform pretty in-depth statistical analysis on your data. These are just some of the use cases. I'd say by far the two most popular use cases that we see are search and log analytics specifically. So why might you use OpenSearch? It's 100% open source. You can use, modify, monetize, and redistribute the software however you'd like. Another dimension of being open source is that it's built in the open. So you have full access to the code, and you can even contribute fixes to issues, features, and influence the direction of the project. One of the things that's really important to create a conducive environment for contributions is to minimize the friction and the steps in order to actually submit a pull request and contribute enhancements. And so the OpenSearch project has no contributor license agreement to really alleviate a lot of the friction that can come with that. The project's community driven. So, first and foremost, it's made with community input. One of the mechanisms early on that Jonah and myself actually collaborated on was putting together a proposal template for the project so that new features and enhancements can begin with a public proposal. And then, as a community, we all have the opportunity to weigh in and influence the direction of the project. And then the last note is welcoming contributions. I'll give another example of our collaboration with logs. Amitai Stern was working on an OpenSearch plugin template, and he'd spent a lot of time and built this really robust template for quickly spinning up OpenSearch plugins, and collaborated with the team at AWS to get that incorporated into the project as the standard template. And then OpenSearch is full of features. We talked about some of these in the previous slide, but full text search, analytics, fast ingest, machine learning, security, alerting, index management. There's a whole bunch of features that help you solve the problems that you're actually trying to deal with the project. So a little bit of things that have happened since the launch earlier this year. We've released another version 1.1, and we have another version upcoming later this month or later in November. And we've started releasing some OpenSearch dedicated clients that are also compatible with Elasticsearch, open source Elasticsearch 7.10 or 7.x, I should say. The Python, Go, Node.js, and Java clients are live and published to their respective package managers. And the Rust client repo was actually just made available last week. There's some testing going on, but hopefully that will make it into its corresponding package manager soon. We built a public roadmap. So part of being transparent is showing what the project plans are so anyone can weigh in and participate. And with that, we've put the entire roadmap public on GitHub so that anyone can track what's going on with the project. We've had 20 partners join the project this year, which is incredibly exciting. These partners are essential to making this project successful. And so it's awesome to see so many organizations jump in and contribute and help make this a successful project. And then the last item I want to highlight is that there's a community projects page now on the website. So if you're building innovations on top of OpenSearch, or you want to leverage other things that people have built on top of OpenSearch, you can go to the website, go to the community projects page, and download and run these different projects. And we've also launched a bunch of features. I'm not going to go into every single one of these, but I'll highlight 2 features that I find particularly exciting. So the first one is cross-cluster replication, which is often, an enterprise feature that you'll see in different enterprise databases. I'm really excited about this because it really helps achieve high availability deployments. What cross-cluster replication in OpenSearch does is it allows you to define replication policies for your indices, your mappings, and your metadata. You can effectively create leader clusters and then one or more followers, and they can have specific indexes replicated to them for regional redundancy. And then the other thing that we see a lot of people using this for is actually minimizing latency from their application to OpenSearch by creating local replicas that have close geo-proximity to the application deployment. The other feature I want to talk about is anomaly detection. So anomaly detection is a machine learning based anomaly detection feature for streaming data into OpenSearch. It was actually launched in Open Distro for Elasticsearch originally, but since then there's been significant improvements to the functionality with OpenSearch. The way it works is you define anomaly detection policy on an index, and it's going to look for basically anomalies in certain time period trends. And then it's going to provide grades and confidence scores to highlight how anomalous the anomalies it detects are, so that you can kind of determine whether or not this is something you want to alert on or act on. Since then, there's been a couple of cool features. The first one is support for high cardinality fields. So one common request that we saw from the community was being able to define policies and then slice on fields like IP address or other fields that basically define multiple sources into a specific index. And then you can get anomalies based off of what an anomaly per host or per whatever you want to slice on. And so the anomaly detection feature now supports that. We've updated the algorithm to Random Cut Forest 2, which is also open source, and it was developed by the science team at AWS. This algorithm is optimized to increase the actual dimensions and high cardinality that it can support, as well as improve some performance. And then the UI was largely revamped to simplify the process of setting up anomaly detectors. And it also now highlights signals that can kind of point you in the direction of what the root cause of the anomaly might be.
Hey, Eli, sorry to interrupt you. I had a question for you. I look at the versioning and I see that OpenSearch now is a version 1. And I was wondering, can folks assume that version 1 of OpenSearch is compatible with 7x of Elasticsearch, or is it more complicated than that?
So it's definitely compatible with up to 7.10 Elasticsearch, OSS specifically, open source Elasticsearch. After that, like all the people working on OpenSearch don't really have a lot of control over the direction of where future versions go. 7.10.2 was the last open source version, which is why the OpenSearch projects derived from it. We are trying our best to build the project in a way that it's backward compatible with Elasticsearch 7x up to 7.10. And we're not doing anything to intentionally preclude compatibility going forward. Really from our perspective, like we're trying to keep this as low friction as possible so that people who want to use Elasticsearch or OpenSearch can move between. Yeah.
Essentially, if I'm running OSS 7.10, my migration path is to move to OpenSearch 1x essentially, and nothing should break. Thanks.
So there is some new things that were introduced after, like there was a question that I answered in typing on nested fields and flattening that is not supported in open source because they added it more recently. So like certain features, if you're using them, will make the migration a bit more tricky. But you know, that's part of the challenge. Is it's going to get harder and harder to migrate if you keep upgrading and using new features that are part of the proprietary license. So
yeah, like just to echo Jenna's point there, like OpenSearch is derived from the open source Elasticsearch version. And so it doesn't have any of the proprietary features that Elastic had launched. It has some similar features, like, you know, OpenSearch does have a security plugin, for example. It does have an alerting feature, but those are, you know, implementations that were built by the OpenSearch project, not by Elastic.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. So I'm going to try to switch my screen here, and I'm going to demo how to get started with the project. Just give me 1 second. Let's see. I have to stop screen share.
And this will be a flawless demo, right, Eli?
I certainly hope so.
That would be so boring.
Exactly.
Cool. So I'm going to just demo the steps it takes to get started with the project. I really want to highlight that this is, it's pretty easy to get started, especially if you have Docker running on your machine. Can everyone see a browser window and a terminal right now?
Yes.
Cool.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So the first step is to go to opensearch.org and then hit get started. And I'm going to walk through the Docker compose process. It's only 6 steps, so it's really not much. You know, basically make sure you have Docker installed, make sure it's set up with at least 4 gigs of RAM. That's going to ensure that the Docker compose setting that we have runs in a reliable way. Download the Docker compose file. I have it already downloaded, so I'm just going to jump over to my terminal session here and stand it up. Run Docker compose up. And then it's going to spin up the OpenSearch environment. And this Docker compose file set up as a 3-node deployment. You've got 2 OpenSearch nodes and then 1 OpenSearch dashboards node. It takes usually like a minute to get everything spun up. But once it's all stood up, you'll see a URL to the OpenSearch dashboards endpoint. So it should be any second. All right. Here we go. So you can see this this message here, HTTP server running at port 5601. That is the port that OpenSearch Dashboards runs on. So I'm going to go to localhost 5601. Then it's going to take you to the login screen. By default, the username password combo is admin admin. You can change that. I'm just using the default because it's easy and I'm lazy. So we'll log in. And then once you're logged in, you can just start adding sample data. So if you click add data, there's a couple of different sample data sources. I'm going to add the sample flight data. And what happens when you click that button is OpenSearch Dashboards is going to start randomly generating some data, writing it to OpenSearch, and then you can visualize, query that data, play around with other features. It takes about a minute to get things set up. And once it's set up, you can jump to the pre-canned dashboard and you know, start playing around with data. I'm going to highlight a couple things here. So one, there's a lot of filter functionality in the dashboarding tool. You can write the DSL queries into the search bar if you want to do really rich filtering logic. You can, you know, use the time selector to filter for certain time windows. But one of the really cool things is you can actually add your own custom filter controls so that if you want to create a really curated experience for other people consuming the dashboard, you can build like specific selectors and different mechanisms that really like are for helping curate that dashboarding experience. You'll also notice that there's a bunch of different visualization types. So we've got pie charts, we've got area charts with points of interest overlaid. metrics, metric gauges, bar charts, a whole bunch of stuff. One of the other visualization formats I really like is the geospatial visualization, where you can overlay geospatial data and understand visually where certain data points are coming from. So with that, I'm going to walk through a couple of other features outside of dashboarding that exist. So just to talk through some of the plugins, there's a reporting feature that allows you to automate refreshing data for a dashboard and sharing the dashboard with your colleagues. There's a notebooks feature that's really useful for observability use cases if you want to define runbooks on what queries to run, what visualizations to look at, and then ultimately steps for root cause analysis. You can do all of that with notebooks. There's an alerting feature so that you can automate alerting on data that's being written into OpenSearch. I mentioned anomaly detection. There's trace analytics built in, and much more. I'm going to dive into the query workbench and show some of the querying features that you can do inside OpenSearch. So OpenSearch supports 3 different query languages. There's the OpenSearch DSL, which is the JSON-based language. It's almost like an abstraction layer on top of the Lucene language. And you can define really expressive search queries with that language. It's not one that everyone in the world is familiar with. And so the project added support for SQL in the piped query language, which are more familiar with the broader community. SQL is really simple. It's exactly what you'd expect. So if I run this command, it's going to show me the list of indices in the project. If I want to query a specific index, I can just do select star from OpenSearch dashboards sample star, and then it's going to write the data out in a tabular format. And you can even, for fields that are nested JSON fields, you can even expand those fields out and dig into the data that's inside of them. Now, PPL is a really interesting one. So PPL is really similar to writing like bash scripting. So if you've got, if you're familiar with, bash scripting, you can write a command, pipe the output to the next command, and sort of like so on and so forth until you have your final operation that you're performing. So I've got a sample PPL query here that I'll just walk through. So similar to the SQL query, all you need to do for PPL is you say, I want to perform a search operation on this source index, which is that same source index that I had before. I want to pipe the output into a where clause to it so that I filter the results based on that where clause. And I'm going to do where the flight delay is true. And what this does is it returns only the flight information for delayed flights. So really cool way to do querying. We found that a lot of the people that we work with who use PPL can reduce the size of their query significantly because they can structure it in sort of this piped fashion. So with that, I'm going to jump back to the presentation, but I saw there's a question, so I'll answer that first. So what is the best way to extract gigabytes of data from OpenSearch in a performant way? I think it depends on what you're trying to do with the extraction. If you're trying to just like do a backup, there's a snapshotting tool for that. But there are a bunch of connectors with other tools that you can use if you're trying to extract data from OpenSearch into another specific tool. And some of those do have like optimized techniques where they may fetch from nodes concurrently in the clusters to parallelize the operation. So, it really depends on, what you're trying to do.
There's a question from Marisa. It says, is there a performance difference between SQL and PPL?
So I did want to mention one other thing. Obviously, the way that you structure your data and query it is also going to depend on the performance when you try to get it out of the database. So it's definitely, there's a lot of variables in there, and also the way your cluster is set up, and various things having to do with sharding and indexing that are going to determine the performance. So there's a lot of complexity to answer that question beyond what Eli went into.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, sorry, Eli, if you want to grab.
I also saw a number of questions around Kubernetes. I noticed that you answered them in the chat box, John. I don't know if you.
I did some, yeah, in the chat and some in the Q&A. But Eli, could you answer the question about the performance difference between PPL and SQL, if you have data on that? I'm not familiar personally.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. So the way that SQL works is it basically, it's trying to translate as many of its commands directly into the OpenSearch DSL, and when it can't, it's going to make native calls inside of Java to do translation. PPL is actually built on top of SQL. So there's like at your initial query time, there is like a very small overhead to translate the expression from PPL to SQL, and then it's going to then execute the command as though it was a SQL command. And I actually think if you run the explain operation, it should show this shows the DSL query. So you can see, under the hood what it's actually doing when it executes the PPL.
Is it cached? Is that translation cached somewhere? So if I re-enter the same PPL query after 5 minutes, will it still get the overhead?
I don't know about 5 minutes specifically, but it does do some amount of caching. Depending on how you're accessing it, like a lot of times the variation in the PPL query changes a lot because it's like an interactive exploration thing, and so you might not see a lot of cache saving time if you're like adding more pipes or constantly sort of like refactoring the query. But if you run it twice in a row, you should see relatively, similar performance, a little bit faster.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
And do you think that the questions about Kubernetes have been addressed, or do you want to comment further, John, Eli? There was some question how to run them in Kubernetes.
Is there a question about? So
yeah, I answered one on deploying on Kubernetes and mentioned the Helm chart today, and that there's work and discussion around an operator at some point, but
which we'll get to towards the end of this for sure. Yeah, but there is a Helm chart today, like Jonah said, and we can definitely dig into the operator thing because it's an area where, as a community, we are looking for people to partner with on building out.
Thanks.
So I'm going to stop this share and jump back to my screen here. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, cool. Can you all see my presentation now?
Yes.
Let's do it. Okay. So what's next with OpenSearch? I'm not going to go into every single feature that's in the roadmap. The good news is the roadmap's public, so anyone here can jump in and take a look at all the things that are going on. But I will talk about some themes that the project is really leaning into. So the first theme is cost, performance, and reliability. As you can imagine, when people are using OpenSearch as a database backend, they really want something that is cost-effective at scale. It's performant so that it's meeting the actual use case needs, and then it's reliable, which means like ease of operations, right? Some of the upcoming features in the roadmap right now that are in this respective theme include things like indexing level shard or indexing back pressure at the shard level. It's a mouthful, but basically OpenSearch and Elasticsearch historically have had challenges in operating reliably when you have a really large spiky indexing operation come in, it can thrash the system and cause cascading issues across other operations going on in the cluster. And so one of the things that is being added to the project in 1.2 is the ability to detect when those spiky workloads are coming in and then apply back pressure to preserve stability for the rest of the system. Another theme is ease of use. So this kind of comes in two flavors. There's ease of administration and then ease of actually using features. On ease of administration, there are projects like Performance Analyzer that the project is looking at enhancing to be more accessible and easier to consume information from. Performance Analyzer, to give a little bit of background information, is a combination of a sidecar as well as a plugin in the OpenSearch cluster itself that provides really rich metrics that it's getting things from like how the operating system itself is performing. It's looking at JVM statistics and kind of presenting a view of all the different things that might be impacting the health of your cluster. And so, we're looking at ways we can make that easier to consume. Performance Analyzer RCA is a really good example where that's a framework built on top of the Performance Analyzer that actually is used to highlight root cause of specific problems. And then in terms of features, I'd say like there's a lot of effort in improving existing functionality so that it's easier to actually utilize the feature. I mentioned way earlier that the anomaly detection UI was revamped. There's another example I'll get to on the next slide here called drag and drop, but really, a big theme is just making it easier to take advantage of the features that are there today. So the third theme is log analytics. And log analytics is a theme because it's the most popular use case for OpenSearch. What's in the roadmap and sort of the direction the project is headed in is to build a better curated experience around log analytics and observability. So on the right here is the Event Explorer that's planned for in 1.2. And it provides a view across multiple log sources. So you can correlate events from different systems. You can also deep dive on specific events to contextualize, what might be happening in that specific event. And then the last area, the last theme is extensibility. So successful open source projects that I've been part of are really good at, making it possible for people to build on top of the project, contribute functionality to the project, really use it as a foundation for future innovation. And with that in mind, the team that's working on OpenSearch is really trying to figure out ways to make the project more modular and more extensible so anyone can come in and contribute or build their own innovation on top of the project. You'll start to see certain things pop up like decoupling versioning between plugins so that plugins can move independently and release more quickly. Other things like providing a framework for managing dependencies between plugins so that it's possible to build on top of someone else's plugin and do that in a reliable way. So there's a lot on that front that the project is going to be investing in.
Eli, just a comment on what you just said. Kind of from personal experience, having been part of an open source project that has been extremely unsuccessful, and that area was really what was missing there. The ability for the community to contribute extensions and plugins, and clearly that was because the company was trying to build stuff for the proprietary code and for enterprise. So yeah, absolutely. This is critical in my experience.
Yeah, and in lieu of all the engineering work that needs to happen, we've already started doing some things to at least foster that community. There's a ton of work that's going to need to happen before we get to a place where it's just super composable and super easy to build on top of. but the community project page is a really good example where there were a lot of people who were building plugins and features on top of OpenSearch, and they wanted a way to share that with the rest of the community. And so like over one weekend, I just created a web page for it and started adding those myself. And
Yeah.
we started to see a lot more people since then highlight the work that they're doing, which is really exciting.
Yeah.
So some of the upcoming features that I do want to highlight. So drag and drop is one that I really am excited about. Today in OpenSearch, the process for building a visualization is you first need to know how you want to visualize the data, and then you pick the data that you want to look at. And that can be pretty hard if you don't know the best way of visualizing the specific type of data. It's a pretty like heavy process to guess a visualization, pick the data, guess a new visualization, and so on and so forth. Drag and drop is going to flip that kind of upside down, where instead you pick the data first that you care about, and then you drag it into the wizard, and then it's going to recommend charts that it thinks are optimal for that type of data. And so really smooth out that process. And then, Jonah mentioned this in the last segment. Observability is definitely a theme. The initial version of the observability plugin is launching in 1.2. It's going to have a bunch of features. It's going to have the event explorer I had on the previous slide. It's going to come with a correlation feature, so you can take the trace analytics feature that you're using today and correlate it with log data. And then, down the road, it will be continued to be iterated on, and starting to incorporate a broader set of data. I think ultimately what people want is the trifecta of logs, metrics, and traces. And I think we'll see this plugin head in that direction. So
on the observability side, you mentioned earlier I think it was the performance analyzer.
Yeah,
and you mentioned that's a sidecar. Does that mean it only works on a Kubernetes distro, or does it will just work as a container running alongside the OpenSearch container?
So the performance analyzer is a sidecar for analyzing, like for operating OpenSearch itself. It's not picking up, it's not like an agent or something that's picking up your logs and writing them to OpenSearch. It's just a jar. You can run it as a process on the host that the OpenSearch node is running on, and it's going to connect to that node. It's going to also start pulling information off of the host and kind of combine those sets of metrics so that you can.
But it needs to run on the same host, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like if you were deploying it in Docker, you'd probably run it in the same container.
Okay. Yeah.
Jonah, did you have a thought on that?
Not in particular.
Okay.
Cool. So I've said this probably 10 times by now, but the roadmap's public.
It's in the chat too. I pasted a link so you can follow along.
I'm not going to go into all the specific things, but there's a ton of functionality that's coming out. There's things even beyond the themes that we talked about. I'd really encourage anyone who's interested to jump in and check out what's going on, provide feedback, comments. Everyone who's working on this, everyone who's a contributor, maintainer, is paying attention and is trying to do what's in the best interest of the community. So with that in mind, let's talk about some ways that you can contribute if you're interested. I'd say the two easiest ways are just participating in the community. And the best ways to do it is join the community forum, ask questions there, participate in discussions. Another way is to join an OpenSearch event. Right now, we're running OpenSearch meetups every other week. We have a community meeting where we talk about different specific topics, roadmap, project plans. And so that's a really great forum if you want to stay up to date on what's going on with the project. One of the things that I do, I write a lot of blogs for OpenSearch, and I also work with people outside of AWS to help them publish their own blogs on OpenSearch. So if you ever have a topic that you want to talk about in regard to OpenSearch, I'm happy to collaborate, or if not me, one of the many people working on the website. And then documentation and code as you're using the product. If you find better ways to talk about how to use it, please highlight that, share that. We want to incorporate it into the docs. And then code can be anything, from bug fixes, tests, all the way to entire repos, like what Amitai did for the plugin template. So, if you have something you want to contribute, we're happy to work with you on that. And then some specific areas today that we're looking for some help. So there's co-maintaining language clients. There's 14 clients that we're in the process of creating. We've created about 5 of them. We've had some folks from Ivan join in and help contribute. And so if you're using a specific language that you have a passion about, and you want to help evolve one of these clients, that's an area that we're happy to work with you on. I mentioned the plugin template for OpenSearch. We also want to have one for OpenSearch dashboards, since you can write plugins for either OpenSearch or OpenSearch dashboards. And then Kubernetes operator. So I'm glad that this question was asked earlier. This is one of the areas where I believe the most useful template will come from someone who's actually running OpenSearch on Kubernetes in production. If anyone here is interested in helping collaborate on an operator, please reach out. It's super top of mind with the community. And so, you definitely get a lot of engagement from community members and the team at AWS that's working on the project. And then the last thing is install artifact and tools. So I know this might not sound as exciting as some of the other things, but these communities we've seen a ton of passion from. FreeBSD, before we even launched OpenSearch 1.0, was engaged with the project team and trying to figure out how they can add support for FreeBSD. And so, if you're one of those people that really loves working on making software, available in as many places as possible, that's another area where, we'd be excited to collaborate on.
Thanks, Eli. Time check. We're at time.
Yeah, we got about 1 minute. Let's go for 1 or 2 minutes. You want to just?
And I was wondering whether there are any questions. There are no questions in the Q&A. But I think we addressed all the other questions. So yes, you can go ahead. And yeah.
So I'll just do super quick thank yous then. I just want to give a shout out to all the people who've been contributing to the project and the many partners that are helping make this project a successful endeavor. And thanks to everyone here for listening to us talk.
Great.
Yeah, thanks to you both, Eli and Jonah, for the great presentation. Really enjoyed it. I'm on a mind of looking into that Kubernetes operator. That sounds like a fun project to dive in. Again, if there are any questions, let's see, I don't see anything. So, Josh, if you want to, 2 minutes about the next event, which I see here.
Yeah, first of all, I want to
go for it.
Thank you, Marco. Really appreciate you hosting the event, and Eli.
Absolute pleasure.
Yeah, Jonah, you guys are fantastic. Thank you for sharing these projects. And just let you know, you have an open invitation. Anytime you want to come talk to our community, please let us know. We would love to have you. And we'll try to support Eli OpenSearch as much as we can. We'll definitely try to push that out there. So thank you. And this is our next event. Please join us. There are a lot of people that come through Eventbrite and other channels and might not necessarily be a part of our meetup community here, but I invite you to join. If you'd like to see any topics to discuss, let us know. For example, this is one that came from the community. People were saying that they were interested in this. So we'll start pushing this out tomorrow. We'll send the presentation, we'll send the recording. Jonah, are you okay, Eli, with sharing your presentation?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. Take care now. Bye.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.